Good afternoon, and thanks for attending the QM Research Online Conference. Morris Thomas is presenting the WHOLE Experience Framework. Thank you, Morris, for being here today.
Thank you. Just want to confirm that I am audible. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that, Amanda. Good afternoon. I am certainly excited to be here to talk about the whole experience framework. Today, I am Dr. Morris Thomas, and I serve as the Assistant Provost for Digital and Online Learning at Howard University. I also have faculty appointments in the School of Business and the School of Education. And I have been affiliated with Quality Matters for some time and currently serve as the chair of the Quality Matters Academic Advisory Council. And so let's get right into things because we have limited time. Our objectives for today are to discuss considerations for inclusive learning environments, to explain the whole experience framework, and to identify practices and or principles that assist learners holistically. So as this is the QM Research Online Conference, this presentation is grounded and comes from a study. The study is called Leveraging the Whole Experience Framework to Elevate Inclusive Learning. The authors of this publication are myself and also Susan Winchell Thomas, of no relation, might I add, who was also the co-author of this publication. If you're interested in accessing it, you can do so by going to that QR code that's provided there. It is in the Journal of Educational Research and Practice. So I do certainly welcome you and encourage you to download the article in its entirety and read more about this research, as we will only be able to engage a snippet of it during these minutes we have together. So this study was grounded in reflective practice. Reflective practice, according to Ganley, is an opportunity for practitioners to pause, reflect, and take notice of instructional practices that may benefit from further assessment, revision, and adaptation. It is my hope that a conference like the QM Research Online Conference that we're in today allows us that time as practitioners to pause, reflect, and take notice of what we're doing and think about how we may do and do further assessment, revision, and adaptation for continuous improvement. Another important component of reflective practice is considering our positionality and identity in the learning environments. And so really quickly, for the participants who are here, if you could just quickly put into the chat what your roles are, whether it be faculty, your titles, IDs, administrators, faculty, all of the above. If you can put that in the chat, just so I can kind of know where we are within this. Great, I'm seeing research scholar, learning experience designer, instructional designer, faculty, administrator, academic quality analyst, faculty, director of research, postdoctoral fellow, QMC or QM coordinator, senior instructional designer, e-learning manager, lead instructional designer. Perfect, faculty, all of the above, faculty and teaching and learning center chair, curriculum development specialist, executive director for a Center of Instructional Design, Teaching and Innovation. So great audience, the perfect people here. So one thing that's important when we start to look at the whole experience is we do need to look at ourselves, regardless of the role that we're going to play in that environment. How we come into that space does determine how we might serve as a learning experience designer, an instructional designer, the faculty member, the administrator, etc. So I provide myself as an example. So I have about 21 years of experience in higher education, both in academic and student affairs, which provides a unique holistic view of the academy. I have training in group interventions, Myers-Briggs type indicator, a Gallup Strengths coach, project management professional, diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace, instructional technology, and quality matters, being a peer reviewer, master reviewer, facilitator of the Applying the Quality Matters rubric in person and online. So I bring that into the space. I also have been educated at HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, predominantly white institutions. Those institutions have been religious, public, and private. I have attended, taught, and held administrative roles at various institutions in higher education. I have experiences, or I'm experiencing higher education in life as a member of several marginalized and underrepresented groups, and also experiencing higher education in life as a member of several privileged groups. I, when I come into a space as a reflective practitioner, I understand my temperament, my personality, and my disposition. That's very important when we think about reflective practice. Who are we? What things really drive us and motivate us? What also are the things that grinds our gears? A lot of times we don't come into the space understanding those aspects. And then what else is going on with us? Every time we go into a space, there are situational factors that not only are our learners experiencing, but we are also bring a human aspect into the experience that makes it whole as well. Well, great. I checked the chat again. I see that there are some folks who also have student affairs backgrounds here as well. So great. So when we think about, again, the whole experience, we have to think about our ever evolving and quickly evolving learner population. So I'm going to see if I can make this a little larger for everyone. So some of those aspects and characteristics of our learners include their appearances, work experience, education, political beliefs, mental and physical abilities, race, ethnicity, age, gender identity or expression, family, religion, sexual orientation, national origin, gender, organizational roles, language and communication skills, and income. There's a lot that is going on that we have to consider in the whole that goes beyond our content, the courses being taught, our subject matter expertise. There's many, many factors that are taking place. So that brings us to the whole experience. So the whole experience was developed to comprise 5 components to consider for thinking about practice and learning experiences and environments. It is an acronym that represents the terms welcoming, holistic, open, liberating, and empowerment. And I developed this framework in 2021. And again, the study we'll talk about is framed around this particular framework. I'm going to share a video prior to getting into the 5 components more specifically and more in depth. So I'll need a few volunteers just to confirm that the video is accessible to you all.
Today we want to ask ourselves what really takes place in the classroom, or what I prefer to call learning environments. Are they ever a place absent of emotions? According to the Cambridge University Press, there is no aspect of learning in any field that does not involve emotions. Emotions are the driving force behind many of our behaviors. Emotions are the effect of chemicals traveling from our brains through our bodies. When we detect a potential threat, for instance, our brain releases the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol, which are the chemicals that prompt us to fight, flight, and in some cases, freeze. Therefore, if learners detect threat or potential threat in learning environments, fight, flight, or freeze can also occur in these spaces. Whereas when we engage in pleasant emotional experiences, our body releases dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin, which prompts inspiration and motivation. These positive emotions, when they are present, they allow people to be more open, flexible, persistent, and resilient, which leads to increased cognitive capacity and activity.
So the whole experience is really considering the relationship between emotions and cognition. Their neuroscience suggests and reports that there is a strong connection between these two dynamics. And as presented in this video, the Cambridge University Press says there's always the activity, or there's never a time when learning or cognition is taking place where emotions are not present. So I want us to just think about that when we're thinking about designing learning experiences, facilitating learning experiences, that there is a very human and emotional connection that's taking place. Also in this video, just to reiterate, it talked about the chemical response and release based on the emotions that are present. And so the way a learning experience is designed and or delivered really can lead to whether someone is experiencing more pleasant chemical releases, such as dopamine or serotonin, or whether there's more of the stress chemicals being released that leads to such responses such as the fight, flight, or freeze responses and reactions. And so this is why a whole experience is important to be considered in addition to some of our quality assurance checks and other best practices in teaching and learning.
Today,
So we're back at the 5 components of the whole experience. The first is welcoming. Welcoming considers many aspects, but for sake of time, I'm just going to focus on this particular aspect. And it's the idea of how we can be hospitable and consider hospitality in learning environments, not only in our introductions and our first day of course class, but throughout the entire experience. So hospitality is the friendly and generous reception and engagement of guests, visitors, or strangers. And so that typically is the environment in when it's teaching and learning. Sometimes the classroom environment or the learning environment are learners for which we are familiar. And sometimes these are new learners. In many cases, these learners are new to one another. They might also be new or strangers to the content. And so you want to think about how this environment can be hospitable. We know that there are certain things that we do as far as in getting started activities or icebreakers and introductions, but how do we set the tone for hospitality throughout? When you think about being hospitable, it's about making that experience, and the experience of a course goes across usually 8 weeks, 15 weeks, depending upon the way it's set up. And so how is that hospitable? When you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is different for different learners at different time, or different for different participants at different times. In this image, there's an image that's showing more of a customer provider relationship, and it looks like it's probably in a hotel. And when you consider diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you think about hotel stays, there are not necessarily checklists that make certain things um, make certain things diverse or appeals to the diversity, equity, or inclusion for specific groups or ages and things, but there are certain components in just how the participants are greeted, how they are engaged, the different things that are available, the different amenities, the way things are set up and structured, the navigation of it, all of those things. And we have to consider those, or we should also consider those in the learning environment. Next, we have holistic. The holistic is the sum or the total of looking at our learners, not just looking at them as intellectual beings and students, but that there are physical, mental, social, and spiritual aspects of the learners that they're bringing into the learning environment. If anyone is familiar or potentially familiar with D. Fink and Associates, Fink talks about significant learning experiences. And one part of the significant learning experience paradigm or research talks about situational factors. And some situational factors that we have to consider in a learning environment to provide a whole experience is how many participants are in that experience. Where is that experience located? Is it taking place virtually? Is it taking place synchronous or asynchronous? What is the modality? What is the arrangement of that experience and how are the learners experiencing that setup? We also can consider what are the actual demographic and particular characteristics of that population. Some ways that we can gather some of that information is looking at our IPEDS or our integrated post-secondary education data systems, which gives us a lot of characteristics of our particular institution. Some other situational factors we can consider are what's going on in the world. So world events. Many of us were much more sensitive and cognizant of this when we were having the major world event of the COVID-19. But there are always world events going on beyond just pandemics and things of that nature that we should be cognizant of and sensitive to because they are likely impacting and affecting our learners. And then any other special challenges, whether they be instructional or otherwise, to consider the holistic aspect of the learners. Next, we have open. So the ON whole is for open, and it is concerned with feedback and reflection. Feedback and reflection assist the participants and the facilitators in improving their knowledge, skills, attitudes, or behaviors relevant to the programmatic objectives and goals. The notion of being open and providing a holistic experience is having built-in dialogue or built-in mechanisms for feedback and reflection, for not only the learners to be able to to receive feedback and reflect on their progress in the content, but also for them to have an open space, a space of freedom to be able to provide feedback. So what is working for them, what isn't working for them, in a space that is a brave and safe space that they know that they can say, this particular assignment or the way this went, it would have been better for me had this happened. So maybe we can consider some of those things in the subsequent assignments and or assessments. And just having that open dialogue. This is a joint experience. We know that the literature speaks about learners gaining more when they play an active role. Well, you only play an active role in something when you feel like you have buy-in and or a voice in that space. That increases that active role and that buy-in. So the open leads to having and building those feedback and reflection components in proactively. Next, we have liberating. Liberating in the whole framework speaks to flexibility and adaptability. Again, I just referenced the pandemic, and we realized that in that time and during that time, we had to be very adaptable and very flexible. However, even though we are now putting, and I'll say this in quotes, post-pandemic or some, ways beyond that, we realize now that we're in a space and time where not only we as usually the faculty members and those who are developing courses, but also our learners really can benefit from a increased level of flexibility and adaptability. So I asked the question as to how flexible and or adaptive are your environments and your experiences? Are you building courses and learning experiences that are extremely rigid? Are there no ways to have modifications and agility? What spaces can you bring and provide more um, flexibility and be more nimble in the learning experience? Next, we have liberating. Liberating is similar, also within liberating with the flexibility, we can think about this through the lens of universal design for learning. So universal design for learning, we have, and we consider multiple ways of representation, expression, and engagement. What are some of the multiple ways you can represent or present information? What are the multiple ways to allow the learners to do the same? What are some of the ways that you can allow learners to express themselves? Many of our courses are very heavy on writing and having a lot of writing. However, some of the learners are more comfortable with expressing themselves verbally. Some of the some learning experiences are very heavy on one particular type of assessment. And this is why even in Quality Matters in its rubric, it talks about having multiple means of assessments and multiple formats of assessment, which lends to multiple means of expression. And then engagement. Are we only looking at engagement as things like discussion forums? In engagement, we want to think about the three levels. So engaging in the content, engaging with one another, and engaging with the instructor. So what are some ways to be liberating? Might there be possibly some options for assessment with a particular assessment? Maybe a learner could be more comfortable doing a verbal presentation or presentation as opposed to a paper. And there's many, many different ways depending upon the discipline to think about this. And then lastly, the fifth component of the whole experience is empowering. So empowerment is defined as increasing the capacity of individuals or groups to make choices about what they want and to transform those choices into desired actions and outcomes. So if you want to know if your courses are empowering, answer these particular questions or consider these questions. What would you like your learners to be able to do at the end of the particular learning experience? And that may not be the full course, but just a particular activity or a particular course session. How would you like your learners to feel or think about themselves because of their interactions with the learning experience? Is the actual experience itself empowering? How does what takes place in your experiences empower the learners? Is it just providing or getting content across? Or does the content lend itself to some mechanisms to increase the capacity of those learners for them to make choices about what they want that are transformative around their own actions or outcomes? And then lastly, has the experience provided personal agency for those learners? What are those learners being able to do personally within that? What say do they have in the experience? And then another component of empowering is reflection. Do the learners see themselves in the content, in the materials, in the lecture, in the assessment? What is reflecting of the learners in those sessions? Is it relatable? Is it relevant to them? That lends to itself for empowering. So before I get further into the study, now that you have a great or should have at least a basis, I would say, an understanding of the framework itself, I'll do a quick recap. So welcoming deals with hospitality, and it considers how participants are engaged in an environment and experience not only at the beginning of the experience, but throughout its duration. Holistic considers the full learner and the situational factors at hand, and it considers how the whole person is engaged throughout the experience. Then open looks at feedback, and it considers how feedback and self-reflection is leveraged throughout an experience. Liberating looks at flexibility, agility, adaptability, and it considers if the experience includes opportunities for flexibility and adaptability. And then lastly, empowering looks at and it reflects the learners. So it considers if the experience provides opportunities that are connected and relevant to the desired outcomes for the participants. So now the study, and again, I provide the QR code if you didn't get it the first time, where you can actually download this particular article that we're discussing today, where this data is going to come from. So a case study methodology was used to analyze instructional strategies and learning facilitation to discuss and refine diversity, equity, and inclusion practices in 2 psychology courses at a community college in California's Bay Area. This was done through a mentor and mentee professional development experience referred to as the DEI Studio, used 4 sessions over a 5-week period to explore reflective practice using the whole experience framework as a guide to review current DEI practices and implement additional strategies intended to improve the engagement, experience, and success for the learners. Student feedback and data were collected via a student evaluation questionnaire for these courses as well. I will also add that course mapping was a lens to look at the components of these courses, where the mentee, the faculty, was able to look at their course components against the framework to see not necessarily where there was a deficit, but what things they were doing that lend itself to the 5 components of the whole experience, as well as survey and question their students and reflect on that as well. So the student feedback for welcoming for this study, students reported, "I feel very welcome, comfortable, and confident in class. I have since day one. Professor S. Thomas," this was the mentee in the study, "was very reassuring that we could all make it through the course. She was very kind and open to any questions and concerns and stayed after class answering all of my questions. My experience of being welcomed into the course was great. I came into the class feeling scared because of the amount of work I would have to do, but the instructor assured me that everything was going to be fine and doable." So this is some feedback from both around welcoming from both the faculty and the student. The faculty reports that extending a warm and authentic welcome to students on the first day and at the beginning of each class session can set the tone for the whole term. Students recognize and appreciate assignments completed early in a term that connect them to others. I had a really positive experience being welcomed into the course. The professor was able to connect us to students really well via the discussion platform, and it's nice being able to easily communicate with each other. Welcoming can be especially important in an asynchronous online course where students never meet or see one another face to face. As an example, the addition of a welcome video and an online discussion for students to introduce themselves to others function to create a sense of belonging and welcome for students, as explained by one student. I felt pretty welcome into the asynchronous course where we were given an introduction assignment. I was able to share about myself and also learn about my classmates a little bit. Responding to them also let me feel like it was a real class, using instructional time to develop a welcome environment, connect students to a course, engages students, is conducive to learning, and activates a student's sense of belonging. So when it came to holistic, this was some student feedback. I feel very humanized by this course. I feel like I am working to within an inch of my student's life in the absolute best way possible. And I am being held to a standard that is both challenging and within my reach. I feel like I am a whole human being as well as being recognized as a student in the classroom from the check-ins. I like that we were given a rundown of the assignments and their due dates from the start. That way we were aware of how much time we have to dedicate to the class. So the faculty said, considering each student as a whole human being with competing commitments, demands, and desires that may affect an individual student performance is also important. A simple note added to the syllabus inviting students to share any barriers experienced during the term or a shift in language on the part of the instructor to indicate an understanding that students have concerns beyond classroom walls can help students feel recognized. As one student explained, as a human with needs, there are issues I deal with on a daily basis. I have commitments and life experiences that don't pause for school, but that doesn't mean school isn't important to me. Advocating for and supporting students in and out of the classroom inspire a student to notice. I actually feel like this learning format allows me to better exercise my own autonomy and feel like I can still show up to other areas of my life. Additionally, a holistic approach on the part of the instructor conveys authentic caring to students. I also see that weekly and constant announcements that try to remind us of the assignments are due, and it is a way that shows that the instructor cares about the students. Students tend to work harder in courses where instructors see and acknowledge their humanity. So let me check the chat. I see there's some things. So it's open. The feedback, I really liked how honest the professor was from the start in regards to the workload. I also appreciate how caring and genuine she is, specifically how willing she is to answer questions and give feedback. The professor thoroughly explained all the expectations and assignments. Going over the syllabus and constantly checking in with us definitely makes us feel like we aren't alone in the course. An example of open communication is especially shown in her edits on our homework assignments, allowing students to know where to improve. So the faculty and student feedback combined says developing positive student-instructor relationship in the classroom is imperative for learning. Teaching best practices always include the essential nature of clear, open, and effective communication between students and the instructor. Inviting student feedback shows trust, respect, and an authentic desire for the exchange of ideas. Indicating that learning is a two-way street, I think Professor Thomas has been open with the students, letting them know that if her students have any issue or any question, they can contact her with confidence that they're not alone in the class, and together they can find any solution. In addition, good communication builds trust. So liberating, the students reported that I like the idea of doing the survey before a class to put us in groups. It lets us choose our own topic to work on and find classmates that have similar interests or thoughts. The teacher was very flexible when it came to unavoidable obstacles coming up. She explains what she wants very clearly and will further elaborate when needed. I have really appreciated that the professor allows us to create revisions from our drafts and eventually submit a final product that is cohesive with her edits. Students are grateful for an instructor who is not rigid, adjusts the student needs, and allows for student errors. The student evaluator said it best. This flexibility also allows me to be less focused on losing points and more focused on learning and applying what I've learned to my life. Including second attempts and assignments can be motivating for students. We have the option to explain our understanding of our course material and learn from others. In addition, predictability can be liberating for students. It can be freeing for students to find that a course is organized and easily understood as expressed here. This course was very organized and concrete, and it was easy to understand the syllabus. Furthermore, assessments can be quite stressful for students. Instructors who can offer multiple attempts at testing for students allow for greater retention of information, and this also leads to stress reduction for students. So lastly, we have the feedback for empowering, and it says in the student feedback, this course seemed designed to support students in learning and applying practical knowledge. I felt like I was reassured by the professor and by my peers that I can ask for help when needed. I can see the ramping up of higher point assignments when we can apply all we learn on the smaller assignments. Lastly, the faculty and student combined feedback says students recognize when they are learning concepts, theories, and terminology that are relevant to their everyday lives. Deliberately interjecting curriculum and assignments that are pertinent to their experience functions to engage, enthuse, and motivate students. This can promote further study, maximize student effort, and increase attention to course-related content. Many aspects of the framework work together. For example, holistic and liberating principles are both evident in this comment. I remember in the first discussion where students were introducing themselves, flexibility was a key theme in people's comments. They appreciated having the flexibility to learn on their own terms/time while still maintaining their lives outside of class. Another student wrote, the course also offers room for error and ways to make up errors and lost points. This student expressed appreciation for the ability to make up for human mistakes and found freedom in recognizing the mistakes and not being penalized for it. So some of the strengths of the framework reported were that professional development opportunities involving an iterative structure, which can be applied to support continuous improvement. The DEI principles become more accessible and applicable. An instructional preparation aid to evaluate syllabi and teaching strategies, and a group and individual assessment tool for evaluation of DEI approaches in learning environments and continuing improvement. So just as we're starting to wrap up here, QM has provided us that there are many components to course quality: course design, course delivery, course content, instructional infrastructure, the LMS, faculty readiness, and learning readiness. And while the whole experience does inform course design and course delivery, it's another factor for us to think about when it comes to course design and delivery that supports this QM course design quality wheel. Also, just want to provide this to us. We do a lot of focus on the content and subject matter expertise, but let's keep in mind that we also have our digital tools to consider, the actual learning sciences and strategies, such as things as universal design for learning and/or the sense of belonging information on andragogy. And then we also have the learning environments, how things are set up, whether it be through the LMS. We also have learning engagement, how the learners are going to look at that. And all of these different inner working parts brings us to a whole experience. Also remember that we are at the core of the whole experience, those of us who are designing and delivering these experiences. So we want to think about ourselves as well. How are we doing on this wellness wheel, occupationally, social, financial, physical, spiritual, environmental, emotionally, and intellectually ourselves? Because we are at the core of the experience. And lastly, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. This is something to really consider as we consider the whole experience. So thank you all. And if you have any questions, I believe I've left a few minutes for any questions or comments. I'm certainly open to receiving feedback with that in alignment with the whole experience. And if you would like to stay connected with me, you can scan this QR code. I would love to connect with you via LinkedIn. You could write me there directly or just connect and we can stay in contact with one another. So I'm checking to see if there are any questions. I don't think I see questions, but thank you all for the positive feedback. And I'll stop sharing. So if there are any questions, we have a few minutes remaining. Any comments, any reactions? If not, Amanda, I made time. I was working diligently to make sure I did.
You did. We do have 5 more minutes. If anyone has any questions for Morris, any comments, suggestions, anything. I know it was a very thorough presentation.
I certainly am open to and encourage, would love just to hear reactions to the framework.
And you can unmute and speak. You don't have to put it in the chat if you'd like.
I have a question.
Sure, Dr.
So, first of all, this is fantastic work, and it's really exciting to see this holistic approach to course design, to engaging with students. I would love to know, what's next, what's on the horizon, how you all are learning from this, and how is that impacting, the plans that you're making moving forward.
Sure. Well, what's next as far as in publication? There's already an IRB that was done and data collected with the CUNY Institute of Health, which is the City University of New York across their 25 institutions. There was a training completed where there was part of the training was a faculty mentorship, and then the faculty took this framework and trained faculty across the 25 institutes the 25 universities who are part of their health institute. And so now we are in this phase of analyzing the data and writing another study to talk about how they engage with this framework and how they would use it, not only in learning environments, but because these are practitioners, how they would use it also in practice in like clinical settings, because these are those who are in the health profession across the state of New York. So across the city of New York and the CUNY system. So that is what's next as far as in publication. As far as in usage, I've used this to train faculty around the world actually at this point with just talking about this and some of the content that's provided. Someone put in the chat at our institution, how do we implement this? It really depends on, so we have 14 colleges and schools at Howard University, and so very vast disciplines. And so when things come up, we had a particular department within one of our schools and colleges that wanted to talk about the experience and more about the effective aspects and domains of what's happening in the course for not only the learners, but for those who are facilitating. And so this model was used as a lens or as a framework to discuss some of the happenings and the dynamics of a learning environment. So that's kind of how it's used. It's a framework that can be used in an agile nature itself. It is not overly prescriptive. It also allows you to look at your strengths and areas of opportunity, as opposed to just like, it's not like a checklist, so to speak. So you may already have, and that's why we use kind of either your syllabi could be used to juxtapose the framework, and or course map so you can look at maybe your activities or your materials to look at the different things, or your activities. Are your activities facilitating welcoming? Are your activities looking at the holistic student? Are your materials empowering? Are your materials, are your assessments allowing for the openness, the feedback and reflection? Are the assessments allowing for the flexibility, the liberating aspects? And so that's how we are using it. It really varies. We're using it both on a micro, like one-on-one consultations, to a macro with departments and full schools and colleges.
That's really exciting and very impressive. I see, gosh, applications with that, not only design, but as you were talking about, as we're reflecting on ourselves, because, we are essentially creating the courses, delivering the courses, the vehicles by which it's being done. And so allowing us to reflect on how are we holistically supporting learners. Oh, that's really exciting. I can't wait to see what comes from this upcoming research. Thank you for sharing
Thank
that.
you. And the big, and I'll say that the last point, the big thing you mentioned that I'll further emphasize is the reflective practice aspect of this. This is very much grounded in reflective practice. And a big part of reflective practice is us looking at ourselves first, and then how we come into those different environments. And the different environments is not always necessarily an official learning space, but how we enter into the learning design aspect when we're going to build and design a particular thing. What are we coming in? What are our dispositions? What are our thoughts? What are our preconceived notions? What are our attitudes towards learners? Our attitudes towards this design process, our attitudes, whether we're the SME or we're the learning experience, towards the different person that we're collaborating with. And that really can inform how we approach the work. And sometimes we have to look at that and see where we are on the holistic and on the whole continuum of things as well.
Well, thank you so much. We have reached our time limit. I hope to see everyone at the closing ceremony. I do want to encourage you to complete a session survey by visiting the session page at the top right side. You will find the survey link. You can also complete a survey on the entire conference by visiting the conference page.